So to preface this, the apartments I live in were built in the 70s. But that woman who lived in these apartments off and on since the 80s. I mention her because she has something to do with the story as well. I've lived in the complex for 5 years now. First in a 1-bedroom, and then for the last 4 years in a 2-bedroom. I never expected anything weird or creepy in the 1-bedroom unit. None of this started happening until I moved into this unit. The first things that began happening happened to my daughter, who was around 5 months old at the time. She would often stare at spots in the room randomly. We would be playing with her or talking to her, and she would stop abruptly and just stare. These stares developed into her smiling at whatever or whoever she was looking at and waving her hands. She then began to see the name George, and as her verbal skills developed, even began talking to George. I don't know anyone by that name. Not long after she began doing this, I gave birth to my son. For the record, he as well eventually started talking to George. I'm a stay-at-home mom, and my husband works nights, so I often wait until kids are sleeping, and my husband goes to work to shower and have a snack. Everything was normal this day, but my son hadn't been feeling well and had phoned up on me, so I found the need to shower that night particularly important. I had just lathered my hair with shampoo, when I heard someone pounding on the bathroom door and a male voice that didn't sound like my husband, frantically telling me to check on your boy. One with getting a crazy, scary urge to see both of my kids and make sure they were okay. I've never run to my kids' room so fast. I didn't even bother to turn the shower off. I got into the room, could hear my infant son choking. It spit up in his sleep and started to choke on it. I was able to get the spit up out of his throat and he was okay, thank God. Now this is where my neighbor comes in. It came up in casual conversation, as she used to live next door to the apartment I do. And we began talking about different things like the carpet, the cabinets, the wall color, things of this nature. When out of the blue, she asked, "Have you met George yet?" When I asked who that was, she told me that when the apartments were first built, you could buy them instead of renting them. A man named George bought the one we both lived in. He was an older gentleman, retired, had no family, but everyone in the apartment complex loved him. He was always kind to the neighborhood kids and helped out if people asked. When she had first moved in, she lived next door to George and said he was a favorite neighbor until the early 90s when he passed away. And mentioned he had lived in the exact unit my family lives in now. I then told her about my kids speaking to a George and a story about my son. She told me, yeah, that sounds like him. I still occasionally experience small things, catching a whiff of cologne, appliances turning off or on, seeing things moving at the corner of my eye. And my kids do occasionally mention George in passing. And that's like whatever happened last night. I'm a super aware person, always taught to keep my head on a swivel, and thank God for that. My son, 2 years old, and I went to this local bar and grill where I used to work to have lunch and visit my friend who was working there. My son and I were just playing with his Hot Wheels and waiting for our food. This gentleman came up and just started staring at me and my son and didn't say anything. I'm used to people coming up and admiring my son. He is adorable. This was weird. I asked if I could help him, but he didn't speak great English, but I managed to decipher what he was saying. He asks if I'm married, and I say yes. Plus I have my kid with me and I'm noticeably pregnant. He then tells me he's divorced and it's been hard. Then he tells me I'm beautiful like 5 times. I say thanks and our food finally comes. He's still just standing at our table while we prepare to eat. I just look at him, and he finally walks off. My son and I eat, I pay and say bye to my friend. As I'm walking out the door, I notice him following us slowly. I get to my car and try to get my son in his seat as fast as possible, while I'm watching him get closer and closer. I finally get him buckled in, and then bam, he's standing right behind me. He held out his hand and tried to hand me $1. And I asked, "What is this?" And he said his phone number. I then told him I don't want it, and we told him I was married and I'm never ever going to call him. He kept insisting, so I took the $1, threw it in the back seat, and told him to leave. I get in my car, lock the doors, collect myself, and start to back out. As I'm going through the parking lot, I see him in his car waiting for me to leave, so he can follow me. I jet out on the busy streets, trying to lose him, but he kept up right behind me. Obviously, I don't want to drive home at this point. My husband's out of town. I don't know this guy knowing where I live. So I start heading to my parents, where I'd already called my dad and gave him a heads up to meet me outside with his gun. He's still riding my ass at this point, and we get to a roundabout, so I just keep going around and around. And so did he. More cars eventually started filling in the roundabouts where he wasn't directly behind me, and I pulled off to my parents' street. I looked behind me, and he had started following a car that looked similar to mine. I finally had gotten him off my tail. About 7 years ago, my husband and I were living with his parents. His mother didn't work, so essentially, we were there helping his dad pay bills that his mom and her friends, aka neighborhood speakers, would rack up. His mother was friends with a couple, let's call them Debbie and Dave, who lived in an RV with their young son. She agreed that for $100, we could park in front of our house and use electric water. We were kinda odd, but nice for the most part. It'd never really been creepy, and I'd never been alone with Debbie or Dave before this. Usually I would just exchange small pleasantries passing on my way, to or from work or school. Not a big deal. Anyways, summer rolls around, so I had a little bit more free time during the day, which meant I was hanging around at home more often. And had a big patio in the back, and a nice setup with a table, chairs, and outdoor bar. I made a habit of heading out there in the morning to drink my coffee and smoke a bowl. It was quiet. I enjoyed not having to deal with anyone else. This morning seemed off though. When I got up to get coffee around 8 a.m, and some door was wide open. Weird. But we had a lot of people running out, so I figured someone came all that and just forgot to shut it. I shut it on my way to get my coffee and go out back. I finished my coffee and smoke, and head back in time to get a second cup of coffee, and the door again is open. I start to shut it again when I hear someone yelling at me, "Hey, hold on, I need to open." I look at the door and here comes Dave with this huge basket of clothes. "Can you show me how to use your washer?" "Yeah, no problem." So I take Dave to the laundry room to show how to use our washer dryer, and try to leave to get my second cup. I'm halfway at the door when Dave grabs my arm hard and says, "Wait, where are you going? I need to talk to you." He then goes on to explain he was going to dump Debbie and their son and leave them at her mom's house. And then came the big creep no. You could believe it's the RV with Navy wanted. I tried to as nice as I could let her know I was married and had no interest in living in an RV. "Oh, married? Aren't you a little young for that?" I was 22. Now if that didn't already piss me off and creep me out, the next sentence out of his mouth sure did. "And I'm sorry, you don't seem as serious about that guy because you flirt with me all the time." I didn't. I'd barely spoken to this man, let alone flirt with him. Being somewhat nervous and a bit mad at this 40s, boring, beer-gutted, jobless, dirty man, I laid into him. I let him know in a now not so nice way that I loved my husband, had never flirted with him. Thought it was good he was ditching his son and his mom and grandma, because then he'd have a way better life. And lastly, to fuck off, but I wasn't gonna live in an RV with anyone, and especially not him. Debbie later asked me about being rude to her husband. I then let her know the whole story, at which point she also got pissed and kicked him out of the RV. I haven't seen Dave since he got kicked out of the RV, and as for Debbie and my son, when the end of the month rolled around, he drove after me. My town has seen a sudden, unexpected wave of disappearances, without any rhyme or reason. The elderly, children, and everything in between. No consistency, not even in terms of race. Usually, kidnappers or murderers don't veer from one particular ethnic or age category. This, it was like the earth was just opening up and swallowing people at random. Once the number hit 28, it began to receive national media attention. I could only be glad it was. So forgettable to all for one night, I decided to take my girlfriend out on a date for dinner at a new hibachi restaurant and movie. I hadn't heard anything good or bad about the place, but it was right in the epicenter of the bustling party scene in our town, and the theater had just lifted its COVID restrictions. When we entered the restaurant, we were both taken back a bit. The interior was quite small compared to the enormity of the building it was attached to, but I'd heard they were putting in a Dave & Buster's somewhere, and I assumed it was going to be inside the same piece of real estate. The parking lot was packed, and the only space we could find was a good 3 blocks away. With all of the disappearances, I can't say the long walk in darkness was the most comfortable feeling, so I pulled her close and kept my eyes peeled for anyone who looked like a psychopath. My heart skipped a few beats when we passed a lone man walking by in all black with a beanie and his head down, but nevertheless, we made it. I never stopped looking over my shoulder. For all the vehicles in the parking lot, the restaurant was barely at half past. We got a table immediately. Amidst the wafting scent of sushi and seasoning was an unusually pungent smell of what seemed like bleach and sanitizer. But in COVID, it made sense. Safer than sorry, you know? We exchanged innocuous banter and gossip, and I noticed that only one waitress was working all the tables. Something else a bit disconcerting was noticing people constantly getting out of their seats and running to the bathroom. I figured I was too much in my own head, so I focused on my girlfriend. Food was served quickly. The first thing I noticed was that the food was extremely overseasoned. We both had to send our dinners back. The waitress apologized and practically sprinted back into the kitchen. "I'm sorry for that, guys," she said with humility as she placed our new sizzling plate in front of us. It tasted exactly the same. In order to avoid being the embarrassment of being those customers, we decided to just eat it, tip light, if at all, and never come back. Is on me. Almost in unison, before even finishing a third of our meals, we both instantly began to get nausea. "Fucking food poisoning," I shouted in anger. My stomach began to twist and turn as we each remarked to the other, "You're really getting pale," simultaneously. I don't know what the fuck disease was in this food, but I'd never experienced a bout of food poisoning that came on this quickly. We each shot each other a glance that read, "I really have to go to the bathroom." And just as I watched her spit up a puddle of bile into her plate, we both got up and sped quickly down to the restroom. "See you in a few," I said, as she shot me an acknowledgement that said, "I understand," before pushing open the doors to the men's and ladies' room. What was strange and a bit unsettling was that upon entry through the men's room door, I found myself staring down a long, dimly lit corridor leading to yet another door. Not only that, but I nearly slipped on something really slimy. However, I didn't stop to look at it, as I was ready to burst at both ends. "I'm not paying this bill," I screamed in my head. I passed through the second floor, now faced with yet another fucking hallway and door. This one like heavy steel. Even more disquieting, there was a short Asian man in a dark suit standing next to it. He looked very stoic, and still as I approached. Finally, I reached him. "Allow me," he murmured, with a curious smirk, as he pulled out an old-fashioned skeleton key and shoved it briskly into a heavy gold watch. "Footman, hurry up before I make him..." And as the door opened and I sped past him, I halted immediately in a moment of abject horror. Under rows and rows of glistening, iridescent tube lights, I was staring down something I couldn't even imagine in my worst nightmare. Rows and rows of crud-covered toilets. Even worse, men, clothes ripped off, knelt down on their knees, arms hugging the bowl, wrists locked around them with handcuffs, looking up at me with regret and desperation in their eyes, while continuously heaving and vomiting. I scanned the room quickly before spitting up stomach acid all over my feet. The rows of toilets stretched the entire distance of a mall-sized building, up and down what would have to be several city blocks. And of these people, just briefly, I find myself staring into the tortured eyes of several men and children, once who'd gone missing. The smell of feces, puke, and bleach inadvertently caused me to projectile vomit all over a man with his head buried in a toilet. I couldn't find my tongue to apologize. An insurmountable dread began to fill my veins, like a suicide shot of adrenaline. I began hyperventilating, cusp of a crippling panic attack. The tiled floors were covered in splotches of multicolored goo as another skinnier man in a mask casually mopped the floors. I wasn't about to become a casualty of cruelty. I've seen the way they do it over there, impaling dolphins around with laughter, beating dogs hung by their necks, brutalizing them further by immolating them while alive. The annual Chinese dog slaughter, a celebration of cruelty to 10,000 innocent dogs that could be your pet. Now they've brought it over here, and doing it to us. Before I could turn to run back out, I watched in shock as the heavy door slammed shut behind me, the clicking of the lock echoing in my ears, my immutable last rites. Before I knew it, I was put into a suffocation hold by an enormous man in a gas mask and dragged squealing like a girl where I thrashed around as the words number 47 emanated in a deep masculine voice through some sort of large speaker system, echoing off the walls of a morbid prison, intertwined with the ghastly sounds of begging and moaning, reduced to their most raw form. Unavoidable, crying or fear, unending, a vomitorium of grown men weeping, some screaming for their mothers. "Mommy!" cried a grown man of formidable size, trying desperately to rip the toilet out of the floor. "Open," said the man in the mask. The big guy refused, for his nose was pinched and mouth forced open, as what looked like a rotten piece of squid was dropped into his mouth. Could have been a bloody band-aid. The little children shrieking like injured puppies as streaks of red ran down their chests from the terrible hemorrhaging. If nothing left to throw up, what would? And then I was dropped directly in front of a toilet with the number 47 etched in black marker on the side. Had my clothes cut off me with a retractable blade, and, with what felt like the muzzle of a gun pressed against my temple, I heard those inevitable words, "Poke the toilets." As I looked to the ceiling with tears running down my cheeks and vomit dripping from my chin, I could only expel the words, "God help me," as the nightmarish vision of my frail, supple girlfriend crying out for me to save her or spewing up her own intestines flashed in my mind. Sisters, wives, brothers, children, all crying out for a God turning blind. And then I left an arm inside around my shoulder just for a brief moment, before my purveyor of doom whispered in my ear, muffled through his foreboding gas mask, the words, "God is not here." And then the lights went out, followed by a cacophony of endless, tormented screams. I'll never sleep again. Let me preface this post by explaining that at the end of this incident, I was 21 years, in 2003, and felt like I knew everything. I made poor choices, and I felt like I learned a lot from this experience. So let me begin at the time of this encounter. I lived in New Jersey, and I wanted to move to New York. My friend and I decided that we would find apartments in Rue together if we could find it for the right price. I went on the search for this place. I found a basement apartment that was being rented out by a husband and wife. I thought, this sounds great. Price was great, and it was a couple, so what was the danger, right? Run. So I set up an appointment with the husband to come by and check out the place, where he reassured me that his wife would be home as well, so that we could meet her. The date was set, it was scheduled for about a week out, so I figured we should be good for my friend and me to go down there. The day came. My friend stated that she couldn't get out of work, but begged me to go, so that we didn't miss out on this opportunity if it was nice. So I took the bus from where I lived in New Jersey to Long Island, New York. And when I got there, the man met me at the bus station. I thought that was strange, but was grateful for the lift. He said, I figured I would make sure you made it safe for my place and didn't get lost. I thought this was also very weird because the bus stop was only about a block from his house. I still didn't listen to the alarm bells in my head, and I went inside the house with him. When I got to the home, I fully expected the wife to be at the house, but he then said that his wife had to suddenly go to work. So it would just be me, him, showing me the place. Again, I reluctantly continued on. I went to the basement, saw the apartments. It looked great. It was a really nice place. They started being less creepy, which helped me to relax more. A big mistake on my part, I know now. He asked me if I smoked weed at the time. I did. He asked if I wanted to light up with him. Again, I know it was another bad choice I made. I said yes, and after the second hit, I saw way off. I smoked some serious weed in my day, but this was not like anything I have ever experienced. I knew it was time to go, and fast. I said to the man I have to go now, and he kept trying to get me to rest and relax. I kept saying no, I have to leave, so I started walking out the basement into the house, and he was following me slowly. He wasn't chasing me, he didn't grab me, he just kept following me and telling me to come back to his place in a calm, creepy voice. I was so lucky that I made it to the bus stop, right as the bus had pulled in. I looked at the bus driver and said, this man just roofed me and is trying to get me back to his place. The bus driver asked me where I was going. I told him. I sat down on the bus and I blacked out. I didn't wake up again until I got into my town in New Jersey. Again, I know I made stupid choices when I was younger, and I have no idea what his intentions were. But to the man with bad intentions, I hope you've been caught. To preface, this took place years ago, around 2014 or 15. I didn't have kids yet, and I was about 24 years old. And my husband was working in a double shift, which meant he'd be gone overnight. Which meant I was home alone when this happened. It was around 11:30 at night. Someone began pounding on my door. I usually don't answer the door unless I'm expecting people. But given that whoever was pounding on my door wouldn't go away, they'd knock for several minutes. I decided to see what they needed. I lived in quite a large apartment complex, and it wasn't uncommon on a summer night for my neighbors, lots of college kids here and lots of parties, to have guests over. So I'd figured maybe someone got lost or something and knocked on my door, mistaking it for someone else's. I opened the door to a crack to a middle-aged man who looked disheveled and was clearly very intoxicated. Is Rick here? I'm sorry, nobody by that name lives here. Richard, is he in there? I'm sorry, he's not. This is where I tried to shut the door. The man stopped me. I know he is. He began looking past me into the apartment and started screaming, Rick? Rick? Come out here, you fucking coward. Sir, I'm sorry, there's no Rick here. You need to leave. Send Rick out here and I will. I don't know anyone named Rick. Please leave. He stood there for a moment and seemed to be thinking, or in some sort of drunken stupor. At which point, two of my neighbors, who my husband and I dubbed the neighbor dudes, imagine the show Workaholics, these guys really remind me of them, stuck their heads out the door to see what was going on. ND1 equals neighbor dude 1, ND2 equals neighbor dude 2, DJ equals drum guy, and obviously me is me. ND1, hey man, everything alright down there? BJ, is Rick in there? ND2, who's that? DJ, my brother, I'm looking for him. He lives here and I need a place to crash. ND2, well, if Rick does live here, it's not with her, and not with us. That they're on the apartments, bro. Nay, sorry about you, brother, I have to go, but maybe you should try calling him. I then shut and locked my door, and the neighbor dudes talked to this guy for a few minutes and he went away. After which, of course, neighbor dudes knocked on my door and asked if I was okay. I was a little bit freaked out. They offered me some beer and asked if I wanted to sleep on their couch. I took the beer, hung out of their place for a few hours, and then went home. Neighbor dudes insist on walking me to my door, even though it was about 4 or 5 feet away low. But I'm glad they did. Let me start by adding a little info of context. I'm a 29-year-old female, but often get mistaken for being much younger than I am. Usually people mistake me for being 13 or 15 years old, as I have a baby face and I'm 5'2", which I usually use to my advantage when I don't want to talk to someone. So yesterday, Saturday, I went to the mall to pick up a new dress since my cousin is getting married next month. Small ceremony at her house due to COVID. I wasn't picking anything too fancy since the wedding isn't super big or traditional, but dresses I thought would look nice though. As I picked the last of my 5 options and made my way to the dressing room, I was approached by a woman who asked how old I was. I told her not to worry about it and went to try things on. I picked out a dress I liked and exited the dressing room. When I returned the unwanted dresses to an employee, I was again approached by the same woman, who again decided it was her business to ask how old I was. Again, I told her, don't worry about it, and continued on to find some cute shoes to match my dress. In the shoe section, I was approached yet again by this woman, who all of a sudden decided I was a child, and proceeded to go on a rant about how 12-year-olds shouldn't be left in the mall alone. And where is your mother? As nicely as I could in that moment, I let her know I am an adult. I was fine, and could she please leave me alone? This, I guess, upset her, and she reported me to a security guard as a lost child. When approached by security, I answered all his questions, and even showed my ID to prove I am an adult, and let him know she'd been bothering me. As far as I know, he told her I was an adult, and to leave me alone. The rest of the day, whenever I went in the mall, this woman followed me into every store I went to. Finally, I got annoyed enough just to leave where the woman followed me, to my car, but she proceeded to tell me to get into her car and she would drive me home. I let her know, again, I'm an adult. I had my own car, wisdom to drive myself home. I then got in my car and drove around for a good hour before going home. So here goes. As a young child, my mum works and went to school and my dad was a construction worker, which often meant he was out of town. This left my grandma, who was retired, to watch us since they couldn't afford daycare. I was 4, little sister was 2, and big sister was 9. One day, my grandmother decided, since the weather was nice, it would be good to take my 2 sisters and I to the park. My little sister and grandma mostly played on the swings and hung out on a blanket in the toddler area of the park. My older sister had met up with a friend from her school and was playing, which left me on the jungle gym, also on the toddler side of the playground, happily playing with 2 other young girls around my age. It's a bit fuzzy what exactly we were playing and talking about. I mean, this was almost 25 years ago now. But I do clearly remember one of the little girls I was playing with bragging about how she and her family lived in a van and how she had lots of Barbies in a van. Obviously, being a 4-year-old little girl, I loved Barbies. Next thing I know, the other little girl we had been playing with asked if she could bring her Barbies on the playground. She said no, because they'd get dirty, but her dad wanted us to get into the van with her to play. The other little girl left to ask her mom. I was going to ask my grandma, but she was busy with my little sister, so I thought it would be okay to just go. All it took was my grandma looking away for a split second, and this little girl's dad was leading her and I away by the hand. When my grandma saw this, she, for obvious reasons, became upset with the man and made him let go of me. I remember clear as day, him telling her, "It's okay, we'll just come to the van to play Barbies." And my grandma responding with, "She doesn't get into anyone's car but mine. If you want her to play Barbies, bring them out here." The man just shrugged, walked off with the little girl, got into their van and left. Never quite dawned on me how weird this was until I had my own kid. I was 15 in the time. Due to stress and recent mildly traumatic events, I felt a really strong need to get out of my house. I ended up booking it at about 2 a.m. to a large willow tree at the edge of my neighborhood. On the way there, I passed by a large white van. It was parked near a family acquaintance's house, within view of the tree line, if I recall correctly. Either the van's lights were on or a light inside the van was, but I didn't look in. I was panicky as hell and just wanted to get to the tree. So I got to the tree, climbed in, eventually calmed down, and started to go home. Before I left, I took a flash photo of the tree with my phone. I was having a really cringy photography phase. I was in view of the van at that point, and the flash was bright as hell. Nearly immediately, the van books you else the neighborhood, speeding and everything. I honestly didn't think much of it at the time, as I was still out of it. But looking back, that's a bit odd, right? I'm curious if anyone has any idea what was up with the van. I lived in a typical Midwestern suburban neighborhood. We didn't get a lot of crime, and I skated around it frequently, so I knew no one in the neighborhood had such a van. I passed right by the van on the sidewalk, and I was 5'1", less than 100 pounds. Anyone could have grabbed me if they wanted to. Probably was a creepy encounter to whoever was in the van as well, while some tiny-ass kid was tearing down the sidewalk in the middle of the night, in a formal button-down and flannel pajamas, climbs into a tree, and then 10 minutes later, a flash goes off.